Hello everyone, this is Nats Jungle 2000. Since I love the franchise so very much, I have used 13 different categories to rank the Friday the 13th films by point value. It was a lot of fun, but I had to rewatch all the movies closely to get them all a fair enough score. So, the point is that I did not rank them by my favorites. My personal liking for each movie is the 13th unlucky category that I will not count at first. Each category will be worth up to 5 points, so the scores will be out of 60 points total. The categories are story, setting, characters acting, dialogue, action, kills, scary, comedy, ending, music, score, and a bonus category for particular features for each film. So, let's begin ranking. Story! The original gets 5, obviously, because it is the original story about Pamela avenging the supposed death of her son Jason. I give part 2 a 4, because although Jason is now the killer and him avenging the death of his mother will go on for the rest of the franchise, having him survive the Johnny is kinda weird. It's very odd how Jason borrowed to show up to Alice's residence, and Pamela never found Jason. If Jason witnessed Pamela fighting with Alice, why didn't he go and try to save her? Because he wasn't wearing something to hide his face? Was Jason just too disappointed and disgusted with himself to go find his mother? Did he just want to spend the rest of his miserable life in a shack in the woods away from society? Wouldn't surprise me, I guess. After all the ridicule he got, and even probably from Elias. Whatever. So, part 3 gets a 2. There doesn't seem to be much of a story, other than the killing spree just continues from the previous film, and Chris somehow meets Jason again. The final chapter gets a 4. This was the franchise's introduction to Tommy Jarvis. Jason finally gets killed, and by him, in the end. Rob hunts for Jason to avenge Sandra from part 2, but dies in agony at Jason's hands. A New Beginning gets a 2. The story expands on the character of Tommy Jarvis, and that is good. It shows him spending time in a halfway house full of mentally screwed up people and to get over what happened in the previous film. But the story has pretty much nothing to do with the Voorhees. Jason Lives gets a 5. Tommy Jarvis stars again, although I found it a little strange that Tommy wanted to dig up and cremate Jason's body when he knows for sure that he's not out there undead killing people right then. This was important because it brought Jason back as the killer and made him a supernatural, partially invulnerable creature. Tommy's goal was to place Jason back into his original resting place at Crystal Lake. Jason had to be trapped in the lake, but certainly the Jason from part 2, 3, and 4 was very much alive, so the lake itself was not his original resting place. The New Blood gets a 3. Having a telekinetic girl battle against Jason with cool effects to watch, and the story about Tina was kept interesting. However, it had nothing to do with the Voorhees, and Tina's father accident should have happened before any of this Voorhees started happening, because I would have found it all altogether that you have had a random person have another unfortunate event happen at Camp Crystal Lake without even mentioning any of the Voorhees story. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 1. What is the point of bringing Jason to Manhattan or even on a cruise ship? Jason's eternal goal was supposed to be to punish all who step foot in Camp Crystal Lake and who try to reopen it again. Jason should have no interest in killing people one by one other places than Camp Crystal Lake. I don't think he ever intended to leave the place, and he may be classified as a serial killer, but he only intends to punish people who come to Camp Crystal Lake. If the budget would have allowed more time in Manhattan, it certainly would have been a better movie though. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 3. The idea that only a blood Voorhees can kill Jason was a good idea, but it was still brought back from hell in Freddy vs. Jason and was later recaptured again in Jason 10, where no method of killing would work. He even became Uber Jason after supposedly being defeated by the android. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. The creators took a very long time to set on the plot, and the used plot they had come up was perfect. Jason is brought back from hell, so he's an undead creature prowling around again like he previously was, and Freddy Krueger still haunts his victims in their dreams. Although I have not yet seen all the Freddy movies, the basic ideas were kept in their crossover. It was creative how Freddy used Jason to come back, and how Freddy later tormented Jason in his subconscious world where he kept the hidden fear from his childhood. Jason 10 gets a 2. The idea of bringing Jason to the future and all new environment was trying to help keep interest in the character while Freddy vs. Jason was continuing development. But like I said with Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason knows he isn't in Camp Crystal Lake, right? Yet he still wants to kill people even though they are not intruding his territory. Probably the only reason why I would favor this story over Manhattan is because that I read an intended scene was to have Jason even attack his mother in the virtual reality just to show how evil he had become. If that was the case, then I give this movie another point on Manhattan just because of the point then. Jason is evil enough to kill anybody, even if they had nothing to do with Camp Crystal Lake. And finally, 2009 gets a 3. The story of the reboot is much different than the original. I will give a point for that Jason witnesses his mother's killing as a child, because that does make much more sense than what happened from the original to part 2. However, I don't give full points for Jason imprisoning somebody that looks like his mother and somebody searching for somebody who went missing where Jason lives and is almost obviously dead even though he must have never heard the Camp Crystal Lake story. Setting! The original gets a 4 because, again, that is the original story. Part 2 gets a 5, however, because of Jason's shack and outside that is very important and later appears in the video game. Part 3 gets a 3. The story mostly takes place in a barn, and the barn doesn't really make the movie scarier. However, it gets a 3rd point because Jason came out of the barn once he got Shelley's hockey mask, and his face is then covered and is more brave, I'll say, to come outside the barn out of hiding to kill people. The final chapter gets a 4. It was a cool scene for Jason to escape from and kill people in the morgue in the beginning, and he later headed back to Camp Crystal Lake. Also, the kills in most suspenseful scenes happen either in a night, outside, or in a dark room. A New Beginning gets a 3. The halfway house is where Tommy should be, knowing the traumatic situation he was in the previous film. However, the setting has nothing to do with the Voorhees. Jason Lives gets a 5. The creepy cemetery appears not only in an awesome opening to the movie, but later too. Jason returned to Camp Crystal Lake, formerly called. The scenes in the police station were also good. The New Blood gets a 3. It takes place where Jason was trapped, but nobody seems to be talking about it. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 2. It was cool for Jason to kill people on a cruise ship, and perhaps a scary walk through Manhattan, but like I said before, that has nothing to do with Camp Crystal Lake. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 3. This movie had a Voorhees house as a setting, but I won't give all 4 points for that. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. It still takes place in the subconscious mind through much of it, and on Elm Street. Camp Crystal Lake still appears as well, though. I thought that nighttime at the psychiatric hospital was scary, and so was the cornfield rave party scene. Both were scary settings. Jason 10 gets a 3. Although the space setting has something to do with Camp Crystal Lake, it was a cool new idea. The opening to the movie is awesome, showing how Jason was being researched at the Crystal Lake Research Facility, and I do wish that a lot more of what happened at that setting was shown, like the many failed attempts at killing Jason. 2009 gets a 3. Only some of the movie takes place where Jason lives, so most of the movie has uninteresting scenes. But Jason having an underground lair was cool and unique. Characters and acting. But this does have a little bit of my likings in it though, and it is probably the worst ratings in this video because I am not a movie critic. The original gets a 2. I didn't learn to like any of the characters other than Alice. Maybe. And the only character that appeared to stick out from the rest was Crazy Ralph, who would later appear and be killed in part 2. I couldn't really tell what Pamela was feeling when she appeared, whether she was just mentally insane or only trying to hide her identity with tricking Alice, and then later just scaring her with saying, "Kill her, mommy." But part 2 gets a 4. The characters to me seem a lot more different from each other than the original. I like the character of Ginny because she put some deep thought into the Voorhees story and came up with the idea of tricking Jason in the end. That same trick would later happen in the final chapter of the 2009 reboot and the video game. I also like the way Jason acted in the film. He began being the killer because he was not acted with the same anger in this film, his first, than in contrast with the 7th and 8th film. Well, at least until briefly in the end when he realized Ginny's trick. Part 3 gets a 3. I don't think many of the characters were that likable. Shelley did keep my interest in watching though, but I didn't really understand the point of the biker game. And I also did not understand where Chris came from in the universe. But Jason's portrayal seemed the most blank of all his portrayals, and I thought that was a good way to begin the hockey mask, since I think Jason looks scarier in the burlap sack and overalls. The final chapter gets a 5. The characters were likable, and the acting was very good in this movie. And of course, Tommy Jarvis is introduced. And Jason acted so evil in this one. A New Beginning gets a 3. You have Tommy Jarvis again, and he was acted very well according to the setting, but I give a point because the other characters were probably supposed to act the way they did. Some of the characters were mentally disabled people, and although those characters were annoying, they were supposed to be annoying. Joey was so stupid to see him as a character that I felt that there was no loss when he was killed, even though it sparked the next killing spree. There was almost no important reason to expand on many of the characters in that movie. Jason Lives gets a 5. All the acting in the movie is very good, and all the characters were good also. I loved Tommy's acting in this movie, and I also liked the sheriff and his deputy, and Megan, and most of the other characters were also likable. Also, Jason's portrayals in this movie were one of my favorites in the franchise because I think they showed the most personality of him of all of them. The New Blood gets a 4. Tina was a very likable character, and I loved seeing her use powers against Jason. I liked the use of other antagonists, the Doctor and the Tsunami Melissa, who were both acted very well. Also, the Jason in this movie is not only Kane Hodder's first Jason portrayal, but it's also the scariest. You could tell how pissed off Jason was the whole time, but of course he would be after being trapped under the lake. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 3. Jason's portrayal was probably the most changed over all the time, and I liked it. In the beginning, he was just his typical unrepentant self, and he was giving the most grisly murders. And then comedy relief happens when he gets in a pissed off mood towards the end. However, the characters were not that likable. The other antagonist, Rennie's uncle, was adding plot to have Rennie's visions from Arachnophobia, but neither characters, even though they seem to be acted, okay, I guess, were not that likable, and that goes for the other characters too. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 3. Kane Hodder played Jason, but Jason only appeared in the beginning and the ending, and because he possessed other characters. It was cool to have relatives of Jason, but the other interesting enough characters were possessed by Jason, so not much character in them themselves was shown. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. All of the characters were great and very well acted. I liked them a lot. Enough said. Jason 10 gets a 4. I thought almost all of the characters were good. Professor Lowe was an interesting antagonist. Ezreal was kind of annoying, but provided plenty of comic relief. Kane Hodder also played Jason again, and then Kane Uber Jason also played by him. 2009 gets a 2. Jason's portrayal and appearance was a lot different than all the others, but that can't be a bad thing because it is a reboot. The characters did not seem to do a lot more than talk and goof around, and I wasn't impressed with the main roles. Dialogue. The original gets a 5. Most of the dialogue has to do with Camp Crystal Lake and the Voorhees story with it. Part 2 also gets a 5 for the same reason. Part 3 gets a 3. You have Crystal and her story, but not much spoken is that interesting, and the Camp Crystal Lake and Voorhees story is not really mentioned other than the TV knows in the beginning scenes. The final chapter gets a 2. There is spoken dialogue about the Voorhees story, but most of the dialogue is spoken in the movie is not interesting. A New Beginning gets a 2. The mentally disabled people talking is supposed to happen, but it is pretty annoying, despite giving comic relief. I think there are much more swearing and cursing words spoken in this movie than all the others. Jason Lives gets a 5. Every dialogue spoken in the movie is interesting. Enough said. The way that they are spoken is also great. The New Blood gets a 4. Most of the dialogue is about Tina, the main character, who the plot is centered on. Pretty much all the dialogue spoken is interesting. However, very little of it is about Camp Crystal Lake and the Voorhees story. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 3. There is some interesting dialogue, but there is quite a lot of sexual dialogue. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 4. Most of the dialogue is about the Voorhees story and how to defeat Jason, and people were celebrating Jason's death. I didn't really take a point off for it, but Jason appeared to have spoken his only words to the killer in this movie, indirectly. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. Pretty much all the dialogue is interesting, and there are several discussions about what is going on about Freddy and Jason. Enough said. Jason 10 gets a 4. All the dialogue is interesting, and most of it is about Jason. Enough said. 2009 gets a 3. The many scenes that do not take place where Jason is may entertain some audience, but not all audience. The Voorhees story is mentioned in several places, though. Action. This category relates to how the movie is keeping the audience interested. The original gets a 3. Much of the dialogue is interesting. The killer in the car and the chase through the woods was action, but this movie did not have as much action as other movies in the franchise. Part 2 gets a 4. Like the original, although a lot of the dialogue is interesting, there isn't really much action until towards the end. However, it gets an extra point because, unlike the original, which shows POVs until the very end, the killer is seen in full body earlier. Part 3 gets a 5. The 3D effects should help to keep the audience interested. Even though I do not think the biker game was that necessary of a group of characters, at least it added more action to the movie. This movie could keep the audience interested for the most part. The final chapter gets a 4. There are a lot of scenes that are shown before the Jason scenes come back, but they use very good acting to keep the audience interested. A New Beginning gets a 4. Since Jason is not the killer in this movie, just the action in this movie kept me interested. The residents around the halfway house are doing different actions, and the kills do not take too long to happen. Jason Lives gets a 5. There is always something interesting going on in the scenes. Enough said. For example, there is the paintball scene, there are car chase scenes, and there are more guns in this movie than there are in the other movies. There is lots of action in this movie, and the audience is interested in every minute of it. Someone who likes action and comedy movies can enjoy this film too, not just slasher film fans. The New Blood gets a 4. Again, the way Jason acts in this movie was very scary. Tina uses telekinetic and psychic powers throughout the whole movie. There are also several arguments and conflicts between characters. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 4. There are definitely sexual scenes, and there is fighting and thugs, the hunts on the cruise ship between Jason and the remaining passengers. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 3. Jason possesses other characters' bodies, so he does a few different things than he does not in the other movies, but not all of the action in the movie is interesting. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. There is indeed action happening in the movie, and even though there are a few long talk scenes, they are still interesting. Jason 10 gets a 5. It is science fiction, enough said. There is plenty of action happening in the movie. 2009 gets a 3. The uninteresting scenes, at least to me, could interest other audience. Each scene with Jason in it is different, though, and Jason does things he doesn't do in the other movies, probably since it is a reboot. Kills! Yeah, well, I hope I wasn't too generous with these scores. The original gets a 4. Since it is the first movie, it shows the first in 3 different kills, and it was a very good opening to the movie with the off-screen killings. But it took a long time to get to the kills, even though a lot of the dialogue was interesting. Part 2 gets a 5. Part 2 takes the first movie's kills to the next level up. Mark's death is a more gruesome killing of Marcy, Scott's death is a more gruesome killing of Annie, and the bed impaling of Jess and Sandra is more gruesome than Jack's death. The chase scene in the original is not as good as the chase scene in this movie, where the officer is killed in Jason's shack after chasing him, because it's one thing for the killer to chase the victim, but here the victim was unknowingly chasing the killer. Part 3 gets a 4. The kills were new and their 3D effects were very cool, and I wonder how the audience reacted when the movie came out in theaters. But there was another impaling that already happened in the first 2 films, and it took 2 rounds to kill Ali. As if Jason had something better to do in that barn all that time than check to make sure that Ali was dead. The final chapter gets a 4. Some of the kills were kills we've seen before, but they were in dark settings in this movie, and the way Jason performed them was more evil acted than in the previous films. Also, Jason's death at Tommy's hands at the end was very graphic. A New Beginning gets a 3. There were new kills in this movie, but all the kills in this movie were really stupid. That's enough said. I'm not saying I dislike the kills per se, but they all looked really stupid. Jason Lives gets a 5. Some were quite graphic. All of the blood in the cabin, tossing the guy up in the air with the spear, the pretzel with 2 actors, and some of them were actually pretty funny in a way too. There were all kinds of kills in this movie. The New Blood gets a 5. There were so many scenes and extensions of scenes that had to be cut out of the movie to avoid an X rating. That is enough said, right? And some of these kills were the scariest kills in the franchise. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 5. All the kills in this movie were very gruesome, and many of them in fact made the Watch Mojo list. Glass, toxic chemicals, and burns, a flying head. Okay, maybe the flying head was kind of stupid, but it was still a comedic relief scene. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 2. None of the kills in this movie are that exciting, but I add a point because it was Jason possessing other people, a new way of killing. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 4. The kill scenes were great, but other than the bed full, Jason has already done all of his. He impaled and threw, he rotated heads, he decapitated, and he electrocuted, but these were done a little differently in this film. Jason 10 gets a 4. Most of the kills were unique, with the unique settings and tools, and probably the most brutal of those, the liquid nitrogen kill, is the most brutal kill in the franchise. 2009 gets a 3. Most of the kills seem very irrelevant and simplistic. The sleeping bag fire kill was the most different of them, but the other ones weren't unlike kills we have already seen many times before. Scary! How scary were these slasher films really? In my opinion, they were hardly scary movies at all, but here is scoring them by their scariness. The original gets a 5. It is the first movie in the franchise, so therefore no stereotypes of the franchise have been made yet, like the ki ma ma ma. The audience gets a new type of movie to watch. The suspense in this movie is amazing, and since it takes so long to get to the actual kills, it is a little unpredictable. Part 2 gets a 5. I personally think Jason was scary looking with the overalls and burlap sack. The first time we really see Jason on the screen is not really a jump scare since we've expected something like that to happen, in a very scary set of shots in the movie. The chase and hide-and-go-seek of Jason and Ginny towards the end is very scary, and a jump scare at the end, a supposed dream sequence, shows Jason making his facial debut. Also, most of the film takes place in the dark and dim rooms. Part 3 gets a 3. There are plenty of suspenseful moments when you see Jason somewhere in the shot and you wait for the kill to happen, or for someone to notice him and no one ever notices him, but the kills sometimes happened. But a point is taken off because there is a difference between scary and suspenseful. The final chapter gets a 5. Again, the kills happen in dark settings, and it is scary. The ending scenes where Trish and Rob search for Jason and Jason chases after Trish. And Jason is so evil acting in this movie. A New Beginning gets a 3. You do not know for sure who the killer is until the end, similar to Scream, but you do not know much about the characters to figure it out like that. It is implied with the shots ending the scene of Joey's death, though. Where the kills were going to happen were partially obvious, but not immediately. Most of the people were completely oblivious to what was going on and that a killer was around, but the audience was pretty sure when the kills were going to happen. Jason Lives gets a 4! That's right, a 4! What a shame! This movie has gruesome scenes, but has far too much comedy in it to be considered a complete horror movie. But there are very dark settings in Jason's presence, and the POV scene of Nancy holding the knife, like in Halloween almost, and the I see you, now I'm coming to get you shot are scary scenes in it. I would, however, consider this movie the kid-friendly Friday the 13th movie, because it is the only movie without sex in it. Even though there is blood and swearing, there are no people having sex in it. The New Blood gets a 5. It is definitely the scariest movie in the franchise, and Jason's portrayal was the most aggressive of them, and is probably the best unmasking in the franchise too. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 4. Again, the kills in it were extremely gruesome, and the film's almost complete lack of music adds to its suspense. There are scenes in it that can be considered scary, but some more like funny. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 3. The opening scene was scary, and it was scary with the characters not knowing that Jason has possessed another character's body. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 3. It would be scarier to the audience who hadn't seen A Nightmare on Elm Street before, but for people who have seen both franchises, it isn't really scary. But the psychiatric hospital at night was pretty scary looking, and there was some uncertainty in spots of the movie. Jason 10 gets a 3. This is a movie with too much comedy to really be considered a horror movie, like Jason Lives. But there are parts in this movie where you do not know for sure when Jason will appear, but then there are places when you know for sure, even if the characters are not aware of his presence. 2009 gets a 3. Jason's underground lair is a scary setting, and some of the kills are scary to watch, but there are too many uninteresting scenes in this movie to get any real suspense. Comedy! Yeah, what we've all been waiting for, right? Well, let's slash these slasher films with this. The original gets a 2. Not much comedy relief. Part 2 gets a 2. Not much comedy relief. Part 3 gets a 3, another point because of Shelley. The final chapter gets a 4. There are funny scenes that go on for a while before the kill scenes come back on. Some of the characters were funny. A New Beginning gets a 3. The mentally disabled people and other relevant characters may provide comic relief for some people, but not for everyone. Some audience would just find them annoying. Although the scene where Ethel talks to a dead chicken answering the door did make me laugh. Jason Lives gets a 5. This movie is all about the comedy relief. The paintball scene, killing people with I'm dead headbands, the way of some of the kills end, and the sheriff and the deputy having trouble with Tommy and Megan. It's all very funny. This movie is designed to make you laugh at not just dark humor, but entertain you with more than just horror. The New Blood gets a 2. The dialogue, mostly about Tina, is pretty serious, and there isn't much comedy relief in that movie. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 4. The lawn scene of the fight between Jason and Julius is meant to be funny. The kill is kind of graphic, but it is more stupid and funny. After Julius makes several professional blows at Jason, nothing happens, leaving him with bloody knuckles, and telling Jason to just give him his best punch, giving up. The confused Jason looking at the billboard, hehehe. The pissed off mood that Jason has towards the ending was pretty funny, where he shoves the person out of the way, throws a tantrum, and kicks the boombox, scaring them away by showing them his face, and then throwing Ken Kerzinker's character into the glass when he pisses him off even more. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 2. Pretty serious business, not much comedy relief. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 3. Freddy does say some funny comments, and there is some humor in the fight scenes between Freddy and Jason. The rave party scene had a funny death by Jason in it. Jason 10 gets a 5. There is plenty of comedy in this science fiction movie. There are very funny quotes in it, and the character Azrael definitely provides some of those quotes. Towards the end, in a virtual reality scene, are 2 girls offering premarital sex and drugs to Uber Jason. 2009 gets a 3. There are funny parts in the scenes that aren't as interesting. The particular funny quote in the movie is Chewie offering Jason the hockey stick, saying it completes his outfit. That was pretty funny, and he's definitely the comedy relief character, saying most of the comedy relief quotes in the movie. Ending. The original obviously gets a 5. Alice defeats Pamela, chopping off her head, and the jump scare at the end where Jason rises out of the water behind the canoe and pulls her down into the water. Part 2 gets a 5, the sweater scene being one of the most important scenes in the entire franchise, and a pretty scary chase happening before it, and a jump scare at the end where an unmasked Jason smashes through the window to grab Ginny. Part 3 gets a 4. It looks like Jason has been killed, but the audience surely expected him to still be alive. The chase and fight between Chris and Jason was a good scene, and probably the second best unmasking after the New Blood happens. Although Ali showing up at the end, although it gave Chris the opportunity to kill Jason, was kind of stupid. The final chapter gets a 5. The fight and chase scenes between Jason, Rob, Trish, and Tommy were very good, and the very ending was with Tommy hacking repeatedly at Jason's body until he was finally dead. A New Beginning gets a 2. Roy Burns is killed, so at least he is out of the story, and Tommy killed him after he had killed Jason. But the ending was supposed to introduce Tommy as the new killer. After the audience told the creators how stupid of an idea it was to advance the story without the Voorhees, the next movie brought Jason back, leaving the ending to A New Beginning rather stupid. Jason Lives gets a 5. Tommy defeats Jason again. Enough said. The New Blood gets a 4. The battle between the telekinetic Tina and Jason was very cool to watch, and so was the unmasked head of Jason. It was, I'll just say, fine for Tina's father to appear and drag down and trap Jason back under the water again. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 2. The ending was stupid. How did Jason manage to escape in the franchise's chronological order, appearing back at Camp Crystal Lake? It doesn't make much sense to me. However, Jason's unmasking, even though it was very weird and resembles clay animation, did make the ending attention-getting. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 3. Jason is finally sent to hell, but guess what? He comes back with Freddy's help. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. With that being said, Jason certainly won the battle. The final battle between Jason and Freddy was awesome. Enough said. Jason 10 gets a 3. It was a good way to end Jason's killing spree, and fits the science fiction, but somebody sacrificed himself for it, and if Jason found a way to overcome death every time, would that really have been Jason's final death? 2009 gets a 3. I thought the ending was kind of stupid, and I didn't particularly like the way the mother impersonation was used again, because even Jason should have known in that moment that that woman was not his mother, after having kidnapped her and kept her hidden there all that time. But the sort of, but expected, cliffhanger at the end was kind of a jump scare. Music! One of the top 3 things I love about this whole franchise is the music. I absolutely love it. Even though it is not the first time strings are used, the music to me is very unique, and it was pretty hard to decide which movies had the best use of music in them. The original gets a 4 for the original tracks. Part 2 gets a 4. Its music takes the next level up with the original's tracks, and the use of the music towards the ending is absolutely incredible. Part 3 gets a 4. The editing and placing of the audio adds to the horror of the movie and sounds a lot like the video game. The final chapter gets a 3. The music is not all that great until the ending battle. The ending battle music is amazing and is played in the video game, but the rest of the movie does not have much noticeable music. A New Beginning gets a 2. Its music is not all that exciting. Jason Lives gets a 5. The use of music in the entire movie is absolutely amazing, and the tracks do not all sound the exact same, unlike other movies in the franchise. Enough said, the best soundtrack in the franchise belongs to Jason Lives. The New Blood gets a 4. The use of music in this movie is also very good, and it is pretty scary and loud to match the portrayal of Jason in it, with Kane Hodder, and also fits with the science fiction aspect of Tina's telekinesis. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 3. This movie has, no music at all, except for the very ending in the sewers, I guess. There is no music in the film, and I give it 3 points because the lack of music in this film works to help with building the suspense and fits with the gruesome kills. So 3 points for no music at all. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 1. 1. There is practically no music in this movie either, but it doesn't fit nearly as well as in the previous film. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 3. There are a few moments where track music is fit well into the movie, but some of the movie is musicless. The rock-sounding music during the introduction and fight scenes fit very well with them, though. Jason 10 gets a 5. 5. Of all the movies in the franchise, this movie has the most music in it of all. Every scene has music in it. There are very little moments in the movie where there is no music of some sort playing in the background. The music in this movie fully fits the subject of horror and science fiction too. The music is very, very impressive in Jason 10. 2009 gets a 2. There is almost no interesting music at all, and most of it is radio-sounding songs to cover the uninteresting scenes. Score! Now, I know that the critics hated this franchise. After all, they certainly favored character development over what Friday the 13th favored, which was body count. But who cares? I'll still add it on here anyway. I give 2 points for Rotten Tomatoes and 3 points for IMDb. The original, of course, gets a 5. Part 2 gets a 5. Part 3 gets a 3. The final chapter gets a 5. A New Beginning gets a 2. Jason Lives, yes, gets a 5. Jason Lives was the first film since the original to really get any positive reviews at all from critics. The New Blood gets a 4. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 2. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 2. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5. Jason 10 gets a 2. 2009 gets a 3. Bonus! This is the fun part. I'll give an additional 5 out of 5 possible points to certain special things about each movie that stands out from the rest. The original gets a 5 for its use of suspense. The scenes can get very long, but it is just adding suspense to make the scenes more scary and unpredictable. The movie uses a lot of POV shots, and we do not see much of the killer until the very end. Part 2 gets a 5 for having Pamela, Jason's mother, in it as an important role, even though she isn't real in it. Part 3 gets a 4 for suspense. The use of Jason in some of the shots builds suspense, but a point is off because the barn does not add to the scariness, as I had mentioned before. So Part 3 gets points for suspense like the original. The final chapter gets another 5 points for Tommy killing Jason, even though that goes with the ending category. This death would later bring back Jason as an undead, supernatural, and partially invulnerable creature later, and the franchise would be terrible if Jason just kept killing until he died at an old age. I mean, he was 38 at his death, right? A New Beginning gets a 1, because, again, it is a copycat killer and has nothing to do with the Voorhees story. Jason Lives gets a 4 for its added theme song, He's Back, the Man Behind the Mask. The New Blood gets a 4 for the fire stunt in the final battle. It was an incredible addition to the final battle. Jason Takes Manhattan gets a 2 for the title. Yes, I am ranking it by the title. Sorry, but if Jason Takes Manhattan is not about Jason killing people in Manhattan, then why should it be called that? I don't know what it should have been called, but I can say that if the budget would have allowed all of the scenes that were hoped for, then this would have been the right appropriate title. Jason Goes to Hell gets a 4 for the opening scene. It was a very cool opening to a movie. Freddy vs. Jason gets a 5 for being an awesome, perfect crossover film. Jason 10 gets a 3 for introducing Uber Jason. This upgrade, while it is cool, only lasted for a few minutes in the movie, and there certainly needed not to create another 5 films of Jason in the future, because that was not what the franchise was about. That just makes Jason into a real killer, not a Punisher. Just this film is enough. Maybe one sequel would be fine. 2009 gets a 4 for the new things added in this reboot. Jason is faster and more agile and active, kidnaps someone instead of killing her because of her appearance like his mother, owns an underground lair, and looks a lot different. Also, the plot had to do with finding a lost person, completely different, and Jason witnessed his mother's death as a boy. That makes more sense, like I said way before, but the other aspects are a lot unlike the Jason we all know from the previous films. But there shouldn't be something too wrong with that, because this is a reboot that could spark a new type of series. So, those were the bonus scores I gave to the films to wrap up the tallies. So, to add up the scores, let's see who got in first place, second place, and so on. Let's rank all of the Friday the 13th films. Oh dear, this is a very tight score. Let's hope not all of you watching will hate me for this final ranking of the total scores. But I will remind you that I gave all of them a fair positive judgment, and this ranking here is absolutely not even close to matching my least favorite to favorite list. So, here are the final scores. Sorry, A New Beginning, you get last place with a pathetic score of 30 out of 60 for your stupid copycat killer and stupid kills. But I do appreciate you starring Tommy Jarvis. That was a very important thing. Jason Goes to Hell the Final Friday is second to last with a score of 33 out of 60. Voorhees' relatives were a very nice addition to the franchise, but the movie has no music and an ending that wasn't what the characters later hoped for. 10th place goes to Jason Takes Manhattan with a score of 35 out of 60. Now, personally, I love this movie. I find it very entertaining, and there are great scenes in it, brutal kills, and comedy relief scenes. But Jason is only supposed to kill people that come to Camp Crystal Lake. Jason is a Punisher, not a real killer. The ideas of Jason going on a cruise or to New York are, while cool ideas for a new movie, don't really follow the actual character. 9th place goes to the 2009 reboot, and it got a score of 36 out of 60. The newly introduced Jason and plot are ideal for a reboot, obviously, and I appreciated watching another movie that would not be the same as the previous, as that was a problem with the critics. But they are just nothing like the original Jason storyline. 8th place goes to Part 3 with a score of 41 out of 60. The 3D effects were cool, and the action and suspenseful shots kept the movie interesting, and I loved this movie a lot. But the settings weren't impressive, and this was just another movie with people getting killed with really nothing else to the story but that. 7th place goes to Jason 10 with a score of 44 out of 60. This movie is very entertaining. It allowed us to escape the usual setting, and the opening scenes and use of music in it were fantastic. It should be higher on this list, but it is here because it isn't one of the 80s movies. 6th place, the halfway spot, goes to The New Blood with a score of 46 out of 60. Tina is a great character, and making Carrie vs. Jason was a very interesting idea, and Kane Hodder's performance was scary and fantastic. But the story had nothing to do with the Voorhees story. Getting higher, but not the highest, 5th place goes to the original 1980 movie with a score of 49 out of 60. The fact of it being the original gets it points, and the use of suspense covers lack of activity for some audience, but although it was necessary to begin this way, Jason is a better killer. The final chapter just barely claims 4th place, with a score of 50 out of 60. This is Tommy Jarvis's first appearance in the franchise. The darkness of the settings and the evilness of Jason's appearance makes this movie particularly scary. 3rd place goes to Freddy vs. Jason with a score of 52 out of 60. I know this is a crossover movie and it probably shouldn't be this high on the list, but it is a very cool movie. The plot and characters are very well developed, and there are parts, small but still present, in it that include Jason's mother and Jason as a child. Second place goes to the second movie, Part 2, with a score of 53 out of 60. To me, this is a total classic perfect movie. It includes the ending to the first movie and it brings back the same character and actress to open the movie and of the mother in the ending. The more likable scenes in this movie make it way better than the original. The music is fantastic, Jason is very scary in it, and the kills are better than the original's kills. Now, the movie who wins first place is Jason Lives, with an almost perfect score of 58 out of 60. An absolutely perfect movie. Awesome characters and acting, awesome soundtrack, awesome Jason portrayals, awesome action scenes, awesome comedy, awesome ending, and Jason's resurrection and Tommy Jarvis stars in it. To me, there is nothing wrong with this movie, and I am glad that there were at least a few critics who gave it a positive score. This slasher movie can entertain people that more like action-packed movies and comedic movies, because this movie is a slasher, a comedy, and an action movie all placed in one. This movie is absolutely incredible and is indeed a fan favorite of the franchise. Congratulations, Jason Lives! You are the greatest movie in the franchise! But wait, there's more! Since I did not add the unlucky 13th category, in which I give points for my personal liking to each movie, being such a big fan of the franchise, we will add them on now. I give a 2 to the original because the scenes are not as exciting as scenes from other movies, and the suspense was a little too long for my liking. I give a 2 to A New Beginning because it isn't Jason as the killer, just a random character. I give a 2 to Jason Goes to Hell because it isn't as exciting as it sounds. I give a 2 to 2009 because there are too many uninteresting scenes and practically no music. I give a 3 for the final chapter because it takes a long time to get to the kills again. I give a 3 to The New Blood because it takes a little too long to get back to Jason. I give a 4 to Part 3 since the kills were not too long from each other. I give a 4 to Manhattan because it kept me interested. I give a 5 to Part 2 because it is one of the few movies I have ever seen in my life that I can call perfect. The same goes for Jason Lives. It is also one of the few absolutely perfect movies I've ever seen in my life. I give a 5 to Freddy vs. Jason because it is a fantastic crossover. I give a 5 to Jason 10 because it kept me interested the whole way through the funny dialogue and action. So, there are the extra points given according to my personal favorites list. But again, my ranking of the Friday the 13th films are, from least to greatest, is Part 5, 9, 8, 2009 Reboot, 3, 10, 7, 1, 4, Freddy vs. Jason, 2, and 6. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Nash Jungle 2000.